but some other stations, it's sort of intermittent. I don't have a regular television gig ever since MSNBC 2 years ago did not like one of my books.
So, wait a minute. I thought these are the
I
people
think they
that
hadn't read the others.
I thought these are the people that are for free speech and tolerance. So
That's right.
They weren't tolerant of your book, so they canned you.
No, they can't. They couldn't handle that. They said it was a bridge too far.
Hey, I want to ask you before we get into your. You wrote a column that I wanted to talk about. Is America going to pot? I want to get to that in just a minute, talking about the legalization of drugs and where we're headed with that. But can you? I know you follow international affairs.
Right.
Can you explain for our listening audience what is going on in the Ukraine?
Sure, I think so. I'm just writing a column on it right now. What has happened, and I don't want to take too much time, is that the European Union and Russia were basically in a bidding war to have the Ukraine join their respective economic unions. And Russia won with an outrageous bid of $15 billion in loans to Ukraine and subsidized oil and gas. And when they won that battle, many from the western Ukraine and in Kiev were outraged. They wanted to be close to Europe, so they put together they came into the square, they set up barricades. After a while, they began to fight police and occupy buildings and burn buildings and basically do battle with the police and get one concession after another from the government, the regime of Yanukovych, who was corrupt and who was incompetent, but he was also democratically elected. And so finally, although they had a deal apparently to have a coalition government, that broke apart in 24 hours. And Yanukovych fled to Russia, and this new crowd took over. And while it represents clearly the will of many people in Kiev and the west of Ukraine, it is unelected and has no legitimacy. And the folks in eastern Ukraine, whose president was deposed, and in Crimea, which is deeply Russian, 60% Russian, they said, we want no part of this new regime in the capital, and so we're going to sort of set up our own arrangements, especially in Crimea, which is, and so the Russians sent in soldiers to protect the airfields. My guess is it was to prevent the Ukraine from preemptively sending in troops to seize the airfields and prevent the Russians from doing this. But right now you've got the Russians in de facto control of the Crimean Peninsula. Now, the Crimea was Russian all the way from the time of Catherine the Great in the late 18th century to the Khrushchev era in 1954, when it was said in some drunken stupor he turned it over to Ukraine. But that's been Russian a long time. You know, the Great Crimean War, with the charge of the Light Brigade, which was immortalized by Alfred Lord Tennyson, that took place in the Crimea. Anyhow, now, I think what the Russians and Crimeans are moving toward, it's only a peninsula of 2 million, but strategically important. It's the base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. What the Russians and the Crimeans, I think, are moving toward is a referendum which the Russian speakers and Russians in Crimea would win to basically secede from Ukraine and join Russia. Now, that's going to put the fat in the fire. I don't think there's going to be a war. I think the president is not foolish enough. We have no vital interest in Crimea. As we said, it's been Russian for centuries. And I think, though, that would really break it off between Russia and Ukraine, and much of Ukraine would move toward Europe, and you would have sort of a second Cold War situation, not like the first, but a moderate Cold War, and you could get a secession in eastern Ukraine, which is industrialized and really the manufacturing part of the country, which looks to Moscow rather than Europe. So you could get a breakup of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my view is no vital interests of America are threatened here, and the war hawks ought to be told to cool their jets, and we shouldn't be sending warships into the Black Sea or any of that, and that we ought to play this out, because I think, in my view, Putin is acting out of a measure of desperation rather than a brilliant strategy. I think he was faced with what he saw as a populist coup d'etat, which pulled Ukraine out of his orbit and pulled it into Europe's, and he's trying to retain what he can. So I think we ought to be calm about it, and that's what I'm writing. It's people will say, well, that's unusual for Buchanan, that we ought to be calm and responsible.
Talking to Pat Buchanan, he's our guest this half hour. The website where you can read find out about Pat's books and read his columns is he's a lot of places on the internet, but certainly you can go to his website, Buchanan, Buchanan.org, Buchanan.org. You know, I've read your stuff over the years. Of course, you and I would be 100% in agreement on the moral issues of our time here in America. I can't think of anything where you've written on I've disagreed with. And then you've really made me think on international affairs, because you take a different view than most conservatives. Most conservatives take a more hawkish approach to foreign policy. And but would you how do you decide? What do you think the principles we should use to decide where to go to war and where to go into a conflict and where to send our troops and all that kind of thing? Because, what principles do you use to measure the rightness or wrongness of? Go ahead.
This is understandably people say, well, what happened to Pat Buchanan? What happened was we won the Cold War. That was a war between the United States and an atheistic, imperialistic global power that sought basically to eradicate all the values we stood for, and not only that, but to dominate us militarily and economically and politically and every other way. And it was a just war and a legitimate war. And I supported every military action from the time I was a kid up through an editorial writer and with Nixon and with Reagan and Ford, all during that Cold War, because I saw the Soviet Union as an implacable and frankly an evil empire. But when that war ended and the Soviet empire fell apart and all of Eastern Europe broke free and the Soviet Union broke apart and Russia came out as one of 15 nations out of the old Soviet Union, I said we're in a new world now and we should move back to a traditional American foreign policy. It is now time maybe that the Soviet Union is dead and the Red Army is back on the Ural Mountains, that these Europeans who have frankly been freeloading for years and decades should start defending themselves and paying the cost of their defense, and that the United States should now not get involved in, the Korean War and the Vietnam War had to do with global communism. We were trying to stop its advance at the price of American blood and treasure with very little help from our allies. But once that Cold War is over, Russia does not, of Yeltsin or even of Putin, arguing about the Ukraine. It's regrettable, some people feel, what happened, but no vital interest of the United States is imperiled that justifies sending Americans to fight and die. Now, we fought two, in my judgment, unnecessary wars, one in Iraq and the other in Afghanistan. I was all for going into Afghanistan and getting down to Tora Bora and finishing those people off for what they did to us. But the idea that we could remake, Afghanistan into another Iowa struck me as ridiculous from the beginning, and the fact that we bled and wasted billions and hundreds of billions of dollars for 13 years trying to do it. And then we went into Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was a revolting tyrant, but he didn't threaten us at all. And so what are we doing there? They said they had weapons of mass destruction, the neoconservatives did, and he had nothing. So I think we were lied into that war. And what we ought to be now is when you look at Yalta, when I see the Yalta and the Crimean Peninsula, I say, look, you can dislike what Putin is doing, but I understand why he's doing it. He don't want to lose the whole area completely because of a coup d'etat in Kiev. But it is no justification for any war on the part of the United States. And these people talking about sending American warships into the Black Sea, for heaven's sakes, for what purpose?
I want to ask you,
who are we going to shoot at?
Just to clarify one question, you said we were lied into the Iraq war?
I believe that we were misled, deceived, and lied. Many columns I wrote, I said, where is the evidence? And even Saddam Hussein was saying, come on, bring your CIA in here and come find these weapons of mass destruction. I think the propaganda driving us into that war, now I'm not going to blame any particular individual, but clearly when we were told repeatedly that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11, that he's got these crop dusters, he's going to put anthrax on the East Coast, that there was a Czech connection, that Saddam was involved with 9/11 and all these things. Many of these were propaganda, and some of them I think were outright lies, which were fed to us consistently and constantly.
For what purpose,
and convinced
though?
Americans to support that war.
To what end, though? The reason I'm asking you this, and want to get your column on legalizing pot here in a minute, I'm just curious because it seems to me that somebody had some serious. I would say I've always thought that somebody had that this was embarrassing to the CIA and to whatever other intelligence organizations, the Russians, the British, and others who also said he had weapons of mass destruction. And I know some people say, well, he moved them. And I'm going, well, if he moved them, then why didn't we see where he moved them to? Because that's embarrassing if we don't know any better than that.
Yeah,
where
exactly, but and even more important than that, you got 6,000 or 7,000 Americans dead.
Yeah.
I guess 4,500 there. We got, we got Walter Reed here in Naval Medical, and we got 40,000 wounded warriors.
Yeah.
Some of them horribly wounded. It just breaks your heart to watch television.
I guess what I'm saying is,
what
I'm trying to get to the point of that is, and then we'll end this, is that I don't see to what advantage it would have served President Bush, to go into that war knowing that it was false information.
Well, you've used the word. I think President Bush came to be motivated after 9/11 by an ideology which basically he embraced then, a quasi political religion, that it's the United States' duty to liberate mankind from tyranny anywhere in the world and to bring freedom and democracy to the entire world. And this is why America was put on this earth. And he is going to be the agent of this great global world revolution. I think he very much embraced that idea. If you read his second inaugural, which came about 2 years after the invasion of Iraq, you see it. He says we're going to end tyranny in our world. Well, some of us tend to believe man has a flaw in human nature, and history repeats itself, and we're going to live with devils and tyrants as long as we're on this earth. And what the United States has got to do is find out which of these really imperils America and her vital interests.
Yeah.
And you not only defend against those, but if they come and commit aggression against you, you go finish them off the way we did Adolf Hitler and Tojo. But if they're not imperiling the United States of America, we can't go around the world, night-sticking everybody we don't like.
If that's the point, is to liberate people from tyrants, then you could start in you could start down in Cuba. You know what I'm saying?
I will say that about the famous and controversial Birch Society during Vietnam. I remember I very much supported the war. My brother was over there, and I've lost friends and classmates there. But the Birch Society was saying, look, if you're going to send 500,000 to get rid of communism, why don't we send some down to Cuba and clean them out?
Yeah.
And it was a very good point.
Yeah. Anyway, it's you make me think on when you talk about these issues about sending our troops and our sons and daughters and the money and all the things that lives being first and foremost.
Sure. If we don't stop this, we're going to bankrupt this country.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the way empires go down. They get into all these, like the British and the Boer War in South Africa. Read about that 100 years ago, a little over that. That crazy war. They had 500,000 people down there fighting to grab a couple of provinces from those Dutchmen down there.
So let's move now to talk about topical whiplash here.